Okay, I think we're ready to make a start. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. It's so fantastic to see all of you in our first webcast for 2018, dedicated on designing great customer onboarding experiences, this time with Jenna Lindberg. I'm so glad to see you all, and I do hope that you've had a fantastic year so far. As always, it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter. Today we have Jenna Lindberg, who's joining us from Mixpanel. Jenna has a decade of experience working in at the US and LATAM markets, fostering relationships with key clients for disruptive tech companies. These include Apple, Eventbrite, and now Mixpanel. At her current role there, she moved to London to open Mixpanel's first international office and is focused on helping the company expand and localize their international sales, services, and support globally. And as I did say, Jenna did move to London. Last time we had the fantastic Maria Ognova with an American accent joining us from the US. We'll hear another fantastic similar accent, this time actually joining us locally from London. To our topic, to many, onboarding is the most important part of the customer lifecycle. This is where we get to understand the challenges of our customers. They want us to address them. They trust us to understand their goals and objectives and to set them up for success. It's our chance to introduce our products and drive value from day one, ensuring that our customers recognize that they have made the correct investment. Very often when it comes to renewal, this is what our customers are going to be thinking about. How easy and quick was it to start using the tool and to see return on investment there? After all, we never really get a second chance to make a first impression. Now, how do we know, however, how our onboarding has been successful? How do we ensure we implement a scalable process which can be improved continuously? This is what Jenna will help us figure out today. This is what we'll hear about from her. As usual, the webcast is hosted by the Customer Success Network, and I'm your host today. My name is Morika Georgieva. I'm part of the Customer Success Network and the Customer Success team at Beamery. The aim of the session, like all of the rest of them, you'll know the veterans in our webcasts. We try to be as interactive as possible, and think of this meeting as a little bit, think of this webcast as a bit of a team meeting. We all get to contribute. You guys are going to be on mute for the majority of the webcast, but please feel free to ask questions using the Q&A button or to just post them in the chat box. We'll be stopping at regular intervals to have a discussion about these, and towards the end, we are going to have another few minutes for final questions. We'll be streaming the webcast into our workplace community, and you'll be able to view it there in future. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Jenna. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Morika. Yeah, pleasure to be here. Hi, everyone. This is Jenna Lindberg. Yes, calling from London, another American in London. So not a typical day here. Having a chance to get to work overseas was definitely a really, really unique opportunity for me. I'm really happy to be working in EMEA. But as Morika had said, coming from a decade of experience working across many international markets and in the US, and have actually found that this topic is certainly a global topic and is certainly a difficult topic for every type of business and industry. How to really create beautiful, sticky experiences from day one that really build love and loyalty and usability with your products and your brand. So very excited to get to be here. Thanks for inviting me, everyone. So the topic for today, designing a great customer onboarding experience. You know, we haven't really gotten a feel for the room. There's a lot of people that responded today, but assuming that most people from customer success are coming from some type of software service, I've also seen a few folks that responded that may come from more traditional products or different industries. But really the truth is that, as we were just talking about, you only get one chance to make a first impression. And unfortunately, undoing bad habits, undoing poor first implementations takes a lot longer, and recovering that trust and brand loyalty is a very difficult and timely investment. So for anyone that's thinking about starting businesses or on the front end of their customer journeys or more nascent stages, I really encourage you to think about this as one of the first things that you design in terms of getting your product out to the market. Most people end up investing in customer onboarding and resources going into the onboarding experience once they've had customers with pain and they have a churn problem. So my first piece of advice is try to get in front of this. Think about designing that onboarding experience intentionally from the beginning, so that you aren't dealing with trying to recover that brand and trust. So just kind of starting into the who, what, when, where, why. If you're listening to this webcast, then you most likely have a customer-facing role. You interact with customers through a product, and you're trying to make sure that they really get the most value out of that product. And that's truly why onboarding is critical. Whether it's a physical product, whether it's hardware or software, if you don't know how to use it, you're going to get no value from it. And I think something that is really inherent here as someone who works in a company is that you get very much built into your own ways. You think about your product all day long. You're working solely on that business case, on that use case, and you understand it inherently because you truly spend all of your day on it. That's not your customer's job. Often your product is just a part of their day. It's part of their data stack. It's part of their, even just if it's something like an iPhone, it's part of something that's supposed to help them get on with their daily lives or with their specific tasks. It shouldn't be something that is their full-time focus. And a real onboarding program, in my opinion, helps customers get on with using your product and getting value quickly rather than having to become intricate experts themselves. That's actually your job as a company. I kind of want to talk about some experience that I have that was one of my first kind of impressions on a company that relentlessly focused on onboarding. It may be a little atypical or non-traditional, and for those of you that heard me speak at the Customer Success Unplugged event in Dublin, you've heard this story. But I think it was really impactful for me, so I hope it sheds some light for you. We talked about first impressions. And in first impressions, there's no clearer example than something like Apple. I used to work for Apple and worked with their Apple Care team and met people that worked across the business, and there was a relentless focus on detail of the first experience of a customer. And it's something that set Apple apart. And when they went in to build this new generation of MacBooks, of iPads, of iPods, of phones, every single time they wanted to make sure that it was as easy as possible to open their product and immediately get value out of it and have a delightful experience. When they did this, they actually looked at the competition, and it was, early 2000s between Apple and Dell. When they had people open their products, they wanted to have that wow factor in the first impression, but they actually built and timed every single component of essentially hardware onboarding and tried to bring that down before they ever released it to the public. And I actually worked with a team as well that had a totally different take, where they considered every audience that was going to interact with their products and designed the experience to make sure that every single audience as well was accommodated for. So as someone who worked for the executive team, they sat us down in front of a Dell computer in a box and an Apple computer in a box. They put a blindfold on us, and they had us try and open and set up the Dell computer with a blindfold on. After about 30-some minutes, struggling, trying to hit buttons, getting some weird sounds from something I couldn't see, obviously I gave up, and the point was made that it was impossible to set up a Dell computer laptop with a blindfold on. I then moved to the Apple computer with the blindfold on, same timing, and in about 15 minutes flat, I had verbally, with cues, opened, set up my Apple computer, set it to English, and configured my laptop to my style. And I was actually able to type, and it was dictating back to me. The true difference there is not that you would want it to be as easy enough with a blindfold, but they specifically looked at a huge audience that was going to be using their software and their products, which was the visually impaired. And they tried to design this knowing that that onboarding and the time to value was just as critical for that audience. And what are the barriers to getting those people through the onboarding process with a computer and getting value out of their tool? It's probably not something that every business is going to do. thinking about the minor audiences, but I think there was a critical lesson for me starting in and my career in tech, learning that it's really important to think about and consider every person, every audience that's going to be using your software, putting yourself in their shoes, and especially considering onboarding, designing the experience so that they are successful. So that's just a kind of first look into what I've come to know as the true North Star metric for onboarding, which is time to value. When you're designing your onboarding experience, you want to make sure that you're focusing on how quickly your audience, your various audiences, can get value out of your tool. A secondary metric, which actually Marika had mentioned, that I also tend to report on, is first impression value. If you don't have time to value down, first impression value doesn't matter. If you're looking at a box, to continue with the metaphor of an Apple computer, and the box is beautiful, the aesthetics are great, and then you try to turn on the computer and it doesn't work, it doesn't matter how great the first impression was of opening that box. So the first critical North Star metric for anyone designing an onboarding program for their product is getting the time to value down and shortening the steps and creating the expertise and sharing those key moments with the customer so that they can instantly become a valued user. If you can accomplish those things, that secondary metric I've found actually is pretty easy because they're going to feel shepherded through the process. So I would really be interested if there's anybody on the call, just to make this more of a discussion, if you might share some of the things that you found in time to value. What are some of the metrics or the key experiences or steps that you guys have focused on as a business to make that first experience for your customers, a very pleasant experience, a great first impression, etc. I'll leave some room for a QA for folks to write in responses or in the chat box.
Interestingly, Jenna, your sort of question there coincides exactly with a question that one of our viewers has, which is how do we measure first impression value? As always, we come down to our favorite question, how do we measure X? It is always that question, isn't it? Always open to hear what anyone else has experienced with that.
Yeah, it's a great question. So in terms of first impression value, it could be something that's very quantitative, like an NPS score. Always at the end of every onboarding experience, we ask critical steps in a survey to any of the key stakeholders that have interacted with our staff. So that for me is a really quantitative way to get, did you succeed in these metrics? Yes or no, but then also asking some qualitative areas where they can share stories, they can share impressions, and giving people gradients 1 to 10 so that there's room for more than a Boolean. Some of that is really helpful for specifically onboarding. And actually people's memories are pretty recent. So the faster you can get those surveys out, first impression value is probably best measured at that point. So even sometimes first day of onboarding, how are you feeling about things? Do you think you're going to be successful? Is this going to be, do you feel like you have all the steps? Do you understand, how you're going to get there? And sometimes just getting temperature checks. With physical products, sometimes it's a little harder because you're not with them when they open it. A friend of mine actually worked for a company in the States called Stitch Fix. And Stitch Fix is a box that sends curated clothing items to your house that match your style so that you can explore new styles. And, for people like me that are constantly traveling and hate shopping, I have new things in my closet and I loved it. And honestly, they paid a ton of attention to the box. Everything was great. And I had a great experience. But for some product like that, it's going to be nearly impossible to capture through data or surveys anything less than a self-reported, first impression value. So you can do your best. Sometimes you're not always going to have data available, but I would recommend using a survey tool and trying to craft what are the key points in that onboarding that you think you could capture first impression value.
Fantastic.
Cool. I'm going to take that no one's participating as a key to move on. So in thinking about the other side of the coin, often as somebody who works with customers, it is very difficult to get people to invest in onboarding. When they've just purchased a huge product from you, they've allocated budget for something that makes sense to them, onboarding doesn't always seem like something that's valuable. And I often meet resistance with customers that don't see that they should be investing more money, that somehow the onboarding experience and resources should be included. And that's certainly a business choice. I think depending on the complexity of your tools, the sophistication of your customers, where you are in your business journey, if you're kind of in the early stages and you need to get some really great customers on your Rolodex, I don't know if that's a term anymore, Rolodex, or if you're maybe further along and you have the liberty to say, actually, we can give you all of the self-serve resources, but if you'd like premium onboarding, then it's a package. That's definitely a business decision. But whenever I have to convince a customer that they need to spend more money or more resources, or take what we in our business, it is a pretty complex product, takes 60 days to do something right, I tend to lean into the bruise of the memory of what that time that they didn't do it right. And everyone has this memory. Everyone has this bruise where they didn't take enough time to invest in the onboarding, to set things up, to have the right conversations. And then they had to clean up the mess down the road. So this sentence that I have on the phrase is that kind of proof point, and it's incredibly motivating, and customers respond to this, that if you don't have enough time right now to do it well the first time, how are you going to find the time to fix it? You could replace time with money, with resources, with team, with any one of those key motivators and resources that people are running short on. But it stands true that you need to explain to customers the potential pitfalls of not doing this well, and what are those key things that they could fall down in, and try and explain that out to the customer. Since you are the expert in your business, the way that we at least went about it was using examples of customers that actually did fail and learning from them and telling that story, and then also telling the examples of the customers that did well. I would say that people want to tell success stories a lot. It's actually sometimes more motivating to tell the failure stories. And you don't want to spend a ton of time on it or dwell on it, but it is important to help customers understand the potential impact of not investing in onboarding. So listening to those customer stories, failures and successes, I think will be really motivating, capturing them and trying to really dig into what were those things that helped this one customer be successful versus another. And then using that as motivation to get your customers into an investment in onboarding. I'm going to pause here. That was about 20 minutes in. If anyone wants to just ask some other questions, or if anybody has some comments or feedback or anything else that they'd like to share, just pause for about 5-10 minutes of questions here.
Thank you so much for the super engaging content so far. Actually, I've seen that people interact chat box while you were speaking. Some real fans of your advice, and especially the quote that you showed. Some people said that they'll keep that one. We had a question appear towards the kind of start of the presentation, where you touch on particular bad habits during onboarding experiences. We're wondering if you can give some examples of that.
Of bad habits during onboarding.
Yes.
Yeah, I think bad habits from customers. Well, I mean, me as a customer, I'm a terrible use case myself. I would say, personal experience of onboarding mistakes, underestimating or not taking the time to know what the full investment of resources will be. So that being, personal example that actually happened to me the other day. Had to set up my new internet in my house. Didn't realize that I needed 3 additional cables as well as a specific quality check. And it took me about a week and a half to get up and running when they had promised 24 hours, right? It's a very critical example of realizing that there was something that was misscoped and that I couldn't get value out of my new internet package and couldn't work from home. the pain was pretty real. From a mixed panel and from a professional instance, it's pretty much the same. Helping people understand the scope of resources, who needs to be in the room, what kind of tools you're going to need, what kind of prior information they need to gather before they can embark on that journey. That's a huge miss often. And it's actually your job as the company to help inform the customer. And that's pretty obvious in the internet case. Maybe less obvious when you're selling your product, but you are the expert in your business. You know, in each industry and each audience, what are the key things the requirements that they need to gather in order to be plug and play. If they spend a couple of extra weeks gathering that information once they've signed on the dotted line, if you've promised an SLA, you've already wasted 2 weeks. So yeah, I would, somebody said sounds like a standard BT experience. Yeah, that's definitely a difference between the American and European customer service model experience.
It happens here.
Yeah. And then some other pitfalls of the things that people do really poorly during onboarding is just not documenting, right? So going along, if you are, especially as an onboarding team, just kind of pushing through to the next step, I think it's really critical to pause and make sure things are documented, make sure you have everything captured, people all agree to those. I understand the need to go quickly, but I think customer success, I actually heard somebody say this the other day, which I don't really love, but it is funny that the customer is the gas, customer success is the brakes. And that people as a customer purchase something, they want to go, they want to run as fast as they can to get value. And customer success needs to be the control mechanism. They are the ones that, especially onboarding, need to control that flow and the next steps forward. Because again, you're the one that understands how a customer can be successful. Do not let them set the tone. And a lot of that is taking time to pause, document, recap, and make sure that everyone's on the same page.
Definitely. We're the ones that make sure that we deliver it not only in a quick way, but also a sustainable one. I love this analogy. And I think we have time for one more question, perhaps, before we move on. Jeff's asking, how did you hand off between sales and onboarding? How do your handoff get treated so there is one consistent experience for the customer?
That's a really good question. With onboarding, actually, I'll share a little bit with how we designed our onboarding system. We actually have, if someone's purchasing an onboarding package, a timeline that's sold to them and SLAs that are committed to in our contract, because our product is pretty complex and it is an investment. So for us, that timeline is communicated during sales. So the sales team, they're getting revenue, right? So that's when sales is incentivized to play along. They're selling a product, they have the details, they set clear expectations about when, what, how long, what resources. And then when the customer is in final negotiations, we confirm with them all of the resources that need to be in place. And the salesperson actually does that. So the onboarding for us, we actually do have some packages that include an implementation manager dedicated to a customer. Again, a pretty enterprise grade engagement. But for anyone that's more what we call tech touch or self-serve, they actually can get triggers prior to closing as well. So all of that does live with triggers from the sales team from our perspective. And we've experimented with doing it all post-signature versus what we call like an advanced peak look kind of onboarding experience. And I think that actually gets people to sign quicker. I don't have stats right now to tell you what that ratio was, but it gets them excited and thinking about the product versus the sales process. So we've really involved our sales team, A, through aligned incentives and revenue, B, through the process and what they're expected to share, and then actually automating our system so that the last stages of our sales process trigger preparation for onboarding.
Super, that's amazing. I love the idea of shifting the focus towards the value and the product before we even sign the contract. Thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Well, I will keep moving then through our conversation. So as something I love about the Customer Success Network is there's a lot of hands-on experiences and examples. And so I wanted to do the same here and share an inside look on the mixed panels use case of onboarding and how we got to our current onboarding experiences. So this was a journey, and to be very transparent, it was one that took a lot of learnings, both from failures and successes. It took us probably about 1.5 years to get to our current model. So just some advice for anyone that's starting out, try and carve out what would be your initial group that's most critical and start there, I think would be my advice. I would not, unless you have, an entire team dedicated to this, or you have, infinite resources, try with everyone all at once. That's just a lot. So with Mixpanel, we did similar exercise, and we actually started with mapping out and knowing our customer's journey intimately. But we asked the question, what's that ideal journey? And what are those steps that get someone from I bought Mixpanel to I'm a super user? And how long does that take? So we did a lot of customer journey mapping, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and tried to break it down into these key pieces. I think that this metric, what you'll see here in the different journey steps for, say, the first 6 months, are pretty typical for any type of SaaS product. So, you could definitely rip this if it's interesting to you. But the really, really key thing that we learned from successes and failures when we did some interviews and looked through, churned customers and looked at our really awesome special customers was the planning phase. Planning and strategic consulting was a critical piece of why some of our customers did well and why some of our customers just bombed or went completely off the deep end. I think it's pretty, like I said earlier on, the taking time, documenting, being the brakes, and controlling the flow of onboarding. It's something that people actually are very willing to pay for because it isn't something you typically have the expertise in-house. So things like holding a kickoff meeting where everyone comes together, reviewing and confirming the business objectives of why the heck they bought your whole product in the beginning, and then drafting a success plan of, all right, here's what you told us, here's what you said, and based on our experience with thousands of customers, the steps you need to take to be able to get there. The second part, implementing, our product is pretty complex, and so that was probably the most obvious thing from a customer's perspective, where they were like, yeah, we're definitely gonna need help implementing. And that was clear value for them. We see it actually not quite as much as important as the planning phase. The implementation should be pretty plug and play if you spend enough time planning it appropriately and you have the right resources. But those two key components were really the only 2 steps for onboarding prior to getting live with data that required dedicated resources for us. I've definitely seen where that's not going to be applicable in certain scenarios, but for Mixpanel, because it is a complex SaaS product, 2 areas that take a lot of time. I've also seen in tech touch versions of our onboarding now that planning and implementing, we've been able to automate by having people walk through kind of a university style classroom exercise where we give them templates and they fill things out themselves. That planning doesn't have to happen with a person in the room, but we're enforcing those best habits through automated tools. And then implementation, similarly, we give them all of the documentation. Some people are very self-driven, more technical than others, and they've been very successful with self-serve tools and implementation as well. But making sure that we're actually building a framework, and whether it's with dedicated resources in the room or through tech touch and automated services, that they do these steps. And then training is pretty critical. I think it's a dark blue because it's after the first 60 days in our whole package that we've built together. But if you don't train effectively to the specific use case of how they're going to get value from the tool, then it's not going to be a very effective tool for them. And I think this is where self-service platforms are difficult, because often they say, can't you just build us dashboards? Can't you just hand us, our list of our 10 KPIs already built? And I've had friends that work for Tableau that similarly, that's always a question of, can you set this up for us? I think a lot of self-service platforms, the friction there at getting people to buy into the initial investment in learning the tool is really critical to onboarding. And then these other, these other parts of our customer journey that we outlined, we're discovering more about, next phase things that they want to do with our product, other parts of the business that could benefit, maybe some of the areas where there's friction or issues that we can go back and fix, but trying to stay in touch with our customers rather than letting them go off right after training was a pretty critical touch point. And then optimizing, setting time, 2 months, 6 months, whatever that time period is, to come back and ask how their experience is going. Are they getting value out of the key objectives you drafted in that success plan? And then kind of go back into the data alignment and see if there's anything new that they need to get up to speed on. So this was our ideal customer journey. Certainly it ends up looking a little bit like chutes and ladders after you look at real customer journeys, but in the best world, this is what we were going for. So the other challenge that we faced was, all right, we have a customer success manager, a solutions architect, we have our support team, and we're throwing in an implementation manager for our enterprise customers. We need to create some clear rules of engagement. Who does what? And this was just as important once we discovered our customer journey, was where can we be most efficient with our resources so it's a profit center, and it's something that we can iterate on, we can scale. So we did decide to go with implementation managers rather than customer success managers running this, just because of the sheer amount of time that the strategic consulting part takes. So that person is in for 60 days and then they drop out. The solutions architect does also work with them for 60 days in our case. And then the customer success manager very much takes a back seat, being a high-level touch point and somebody that guides the process, but then comes in for training after the 60 days is up. And then our support team doesn't start working with people until after they have implemented as well and they have live data. So that was another area that we could economize a bit, rather than having people touching base with our support team and using those resources for onboarding help. And that implementation manager took over some of the burden from them. So this was the other planning exercise of internally, how are we going to plan our resources against the optimal customer journey? We got real granular at one point and started doing all kinds of fancy worksheets. I would say what was really helpful here is playing the domino effect, right? A lot of customers will say, let's just skip forward to this part. We knew from experience, from listening to customers that did that and didn't go through the ideal process, there's some places you can skip ahead and there's some places you can't. So we tried to map out, all right, what are the things that we could potentially do that are on the same line? And who are the resources that are going to need to be brought in at each level? So each one of these lines actually indicates a stream of teams or resources that need to get brought in, and when they can be done on top of each other versus not. And so that's kind of how we plan this out, just to make sure that we weren't letting people skip ahead to their own detriment when they were paying for an onboarding experience. Also, internally, something we've done, I wouldn't say this is probably something we did initially. I would love if we had, but I'm being real honest. Our onboarding process is something that we have iterated on, and every single one of these steps now has a clear description of who's involved, what the goal of that step is, and everyone in the business is aligned that this is a minimum requirement in order to get value out of that step. So I think we've designed all that. We looked at the customer journey. We looked at who needed to be involved in the ideal resources to plot against that onboarding experience. We looked at the work streams and the potential gotchas of where people could get caught up and where they could skip ahead and they couldn't. But then trying to boil this down to why should somebody buy it? We knew inherently, but what are the key things that if you were going to hand this to a sales partner, they could sell? And so really quantifying and qualifying that for your team was really critical as well. So this is kind of a slide that we put together for our sales team to then go and sell, that gave clear answers to the why should you invest in onboarding. So some of the results after about 6 months of our first engagements with this full onboarding package, we had, per the surveys that we sent out, 89% of our customers after onboarding agreed that our services brought a lot of value. A lot was 5 out of a scale of 1 to 5. I hate that we say a lot of value, but it is what it is. We also saw a 3x increase in our implementation success rate when people used our professional services. And so 3x meaning success rate was measured by a health score. So that health score was pretty critical. And then the 95% satisfaction on support tickets. So anybody that's been reaching out to our customer service teams or writing into our onboarding managers were asked for NPS scores as well and in their interactions, and 95% customer satisfaction rating on all of those interactions. I think this is kind of speaking to someone's earlier question of did we get, or sorry, how do you measure that first time impression or first impression value? These are all ways that we've done so. So again, a 1.5-year journey, 6 months in, this was pretty much a clear effort. It takes a long time for us to measure success with our product because it is very complicated. I think with other products, you could probably do so a little bit more quickly. So I am going to leave you guys with 4 steps to just kind of wrap this up of what I consider key steps to designing the right onboarding program for your customers. Certainly Mixpanel's done it one way. I've seen it done other ways, depending on if it's a B2C product, a B2B product, etc. But really, number one, just understand your customer journey intimately. Make sure you understand the steps yourself and that you have those clearly outlined. 2, take lessons from both your successes and your failures. This is, for me, really critical. I think we do look very much at the positives and not always at the things that are negatives, but there's a lot of value in failure and understanding it and not repeating it. Number 3, iterate with control, measure your results, and then repeat. Everyone wants to have a clean onboarding process for every customer in their audience as fast as possible, but from my experience, it's just not possible. So try to create a control group, go after one segment at a time, go where the lowest hanging fruit is maybe, or the biggest challenge, but try and iterate with control. And then 4, consider diversifying your tool set. So if you don't have the tools in your back pocket, whether that's resources, the right team, the right types of onboarding surveys, try and think about diversifying the tool set that you're working with so that you can effectively plot out, map, and resource that onboarding experience. So for that, I just wanted to say thank you for listening. I hope it was helpful listening to my experiences as someone working with strategic accounts around the world. Certainly, I think this is going to be a lifelong learning process, and I'd actually be interested 10 years from now to come back and do this again to see what else I've learned. But want to leave some time for questions here at the end.
Thank you so much. That was a very interesting presentation. Actually, at one point, I caught myself not following the chat for 2-3 minutes and just completely endorsing what you were talking about. So that's incredibly practical advice as well. Actually, I'm so glad we have time because we have plenty of questions. So we have one question from Jessica to start with. She's asking, do you have successful tech touch customers who are non-tech savvy enough to self-implement? How do you align customers' expectations with budget or segment and their ability to self-implement?
Yeah, absolutely, great question. We actually just we created something that was called a fundamentals program. That's a scaled back approach. That's a one-to-many classroom opportunity. That's a lot less financial investment. And the conversation that we have with those customers and then also with tech touch customers is, listen, you get what you pay for. And if you have the right resources internally and you don't need us, great. But here's the right resources that we know you're going to need. If you choose to go away from them, we can pretty much guarantee it's going to take you longer to get this up and running, and here's the potential outcome. So we clearly outline what the options are. I do think that trying to just upsell people through onboarding and getting revenue through it is a really terrible approach because it sounds inauthentic. And frankly, it's not a recurring revenue stream. It should be a one-time investment. So I think you should be selling people on your product and the right plan that fits them, and then helping them understand how onboarding fits into that investment.
That makes total sense. Thank you for that. We have another kind of a few questions outstanding. In one of the slides that you showed, I think one of the planning ones towards the start of this part of the webinar, you mentioned success packages after implementation. Are these additional professional services, or are they included in the customer purchase?
So for our customer business, for our onboarding packages, we, as of about a year ago, started charging for onboarding packages that were dedicated services. It does include dedicated time from a manager, an implementation manager, on-site visits and workshops, dedicated workshops with our developers. So there's a lot of additional steps that are just actual time we spend with people. So that is something we charge for. We do have self-serve onboarding processes that are included with our product. But it was something that could be, my last company I worked for was Eventbrite, and actually a really easy product to use on the surface. But if you wanted to go a little bit deeper, as someone who did at scale events or had entire real world tours on there that needed multiple currencies, et cetera, it was more complicated. And so we would recommend to customers, give it a shot on your own. And then if there's, ways that you want to come back, you can come back and purchase services. So it was a bit more ad hoc. That totally depends on your business. I think for us, we've found the mutual investment is really helpful because they've got skin in the game. And that means that they're going to show up and they're going to actually get the most out of the onboarding.
100%. And we find also that the emotional engagement during that part of implementation and just getting people to feel as if the finished product is something that they've done as well helps a lot. So definitely aligned there. We have another question concerning the sales handoff. Where do you find an overlap with your AEs, for example? What is the mention of the onboarding process during sales? So you kind of talked that you try to get people a little bit more excited about the product during sales. So I guess how do you get that to happen, especially for your larger customers? Where does AEs step in?
Yeah, the AEs don't actually step in during Sorry, I'm turning my phone as a backup. My computer is getting a little bit low on battery. So in terms of the sales and the AE process, I spoke to this a little bit earlier. The AE sells the onboarding package. That's the only person that would have access to selling it. The rest of the team actually executes the program once they've signed, but they do have triggers pre-signature that actually bring in, here's the checklist of resources you would need based on the package that we've discussed. Do you have access to these? When would they be available? Here's the timeline that we're expecting. Does that align to your development resources, your development timeline? And those discovery questions all live with the AE. And that's a requirement for them to sell an onboarding package. So that handoff happens to the actual onboarding team as soon as they sign, but the prep does happen pre-signature. So that is something that's really critical for us to have people be prepared for an onboarding experience and to make sure that they're getting out of the gate quickly. I don't know if there's any other specific questions about the handing off with an AE. There's not been a negative experience so far because we're pretty critical about the requirements before someone can sell it.
Excellent. And I guess that level of control also plays to your favor later on. To another part of the question about customer journeys generally, do you find that you deal with different customer personas during different phases of the journey? So for example, are you dealing with the engineering lead that's involved during the planning phase, but later they're not involved, and so on and so forth?
Yeah, we definitely have different personas. I think I have a lot of love for people that are very self-sufficient and really good at handling things on their own, but the customers I actually enjoy working with the most are the ones that engage and ask a lot of questions and come in with no ego and want to utilize the resources rather than telling us that they're too experienced, have a lot of they've done this before. I think there's always something to be learned. Products constantly evolve and change. And of course, even if you've implemented a product or used it before, 2-3 years down the road, it's going to be a different product. Also, you have a different set of criteria and reasons that you bought that system or that product or that platform. So my persona that I like working with the most are people that are engaged. It does not matter to me how much experience they have. It does not matter to me what part of the business they're in. If they come willing to learn, open-minded, and engaged in the process, that's certainly the most successful persona. That's the best partner from what I've seen.
Definitely the dream there. Thank you for that. I can see someone here sharing a bit of experience from their exercise of designing onboarding. They've shared that they're struggling with drawing the line where improvements should be made to the product itself for more intuitive self-onboarding versus the implementation manager onboarding process. Have you got advice for balancing this out?
Yeah, I mean, if people are writing in for additional support, and that was actually a really helpful line for us to draw, was that people that haven't implemented should not be using our support team yet. So if anyone, for us, because there's a clear implementation line of you're getting data in our product or you're not, that was a pretty easy line. If they'd done it incorrectly, there's topics that our support team keep flagging, and there's only a certain number of support tickets that they will actually respond to based on implementation questions before they prompt them to say, have you engaged with our onboarding resources, and like giving them the prompt to go back and do things themselves or to purchase an onboarding package. So that is kind of a line that we've driven. It took a lot of convincing for our support team, who are stellar and always want to help, to not help, but being pretty critical about when you can support a customer and when you can't was important. And that's not necessarily the customer success side, that was the support side. In terms of intuitive self-service onboarding, something we didn't touch too much on is even new feature releases. I think that this is an area that a lot of people are starting to spend more time on. I think that always should, for every customer, whether they purchased an onboarding package or not, be an area that there should be some level of intuitive self-service options. So maybe considering tools like WalkMe, which we found really helpful with our new feature releases, might be a good spot, good place to start. Being able to apply a walkthrough if somebody's really struggling on getting up and running, finding the right tools, using the product well. Those are things that you can proactively do that are going to be one-to-many solutions.
Awesome. That's an exciting topic. Oh, one more question actually. That's we might be here for a little longer. How do you say no to a customer and still keep a good experience for them?
You bring chocolate? No, I'm just kidding. Saying no to a customer and keeping a good experience for them. I don't think this works with 5-year-olds, but it certainly works some with customers. So if you're going to tell someone no, help them understand why.
Yeah.
Listen, I would love to help you, but you didn't purchase an onboarding package. There's certain resources that are behind a pay gate because they are real financial costs for the company. We can help you as much as we can with self-service, but at some point, if you want access to premium resources, it requires an investment. Don't just say no, buy this. You need to provide some context as to why they would need to invest. No, you know what? You've already utilized all 10 hours of our team's time that we allocated for the onboarding. We work with thousands of customers. We know it doesn't take this much time. You have special circumstances. Here's the 10 things we see as big issues. If you'd like additional time or support in working those out, we can talk about a bigger onboarding package, but give them something, right? Go back to them with a clear action path or a reason rather than just saying no to them. My grandfather actually told me a really nice thing when I was younger. He was a very diplomatic person and he owned his own company. And he told me that the test of a true diplomat was to tell someone to go to hell in such a nice way that they pack their bags and look forward to the trip.
I love the kind of touch to actually bring in value in everything you do. So we often on the Customer Success Network actually talk about how to deal with angry customers. And we sometimes say that, you know, customers are angry because they care. So if they care, they're probably going to listen to the value that you have to bring if their emotions involved.
Yeah. I mean, I think the classic onboarding issue is they're not onboarded yet and they've run out of resources, or they've taken 5x as long as any other customer you've ever worked with. And you have to draw the line in the sand. The part of an onboarding program is being critical about those resources. So making sure it's scalable, making sure it's something that works. And if you find that 5, 6, 7 customers in a row aren't able to get through those key touch points with resources that you've allocated for them, then there's something wrong with your model, and you need to go back and look at it and think about ways that you can do that. But you won't know that if you keep just throwing in freebies, if you keep just throwing resources at something. So I would recommend saying no for your own business's health, and for the onboarding experience, making sure that you're documenting what the reasons are that they're running into, why they're upset with, you know, your onboarding experience specifically.
That's very true. And I think we have a number of fans amongst our audience of our quotes. Firstly, the one that you showed in the presentation, and then the one from your grandfather. What you do, our grandparents teach us, is always valuable, and it finds applications across our professional and personal life. So thank you for sharing that person.
Yeah.
We have another few minutes of questions, but we have covered so much. It's been such a fantastic experience to be here with you. I couldn't thank you enough for your advice and your experience as well. It was a very kind of practical presentation. So do not be surprised if there is a lot of demand for you to come back to us a little bit.
Definitely. It's been a pleasure, sincerely. Thanks for inviting me on. I hope you walked away with at least a couple of things to think about. To be very clear, I was not the person and the sole person that came up with this plan. It takes a village, and I do have experience of how it's worked every day when I get to work with great customers that followed the onboarding experience. And you know, I've been around when there's been failures. So I just encourage everybody to keep trying. I think those efforts will be rewarded. And if you do have any questions, I'm always available. Feel free to send a note to me via LinkedIn. And if I don't have the answer, I can certainly find somebody who can help you out.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for attending and being with us. Absolutely continue the conversation on our Customer Success Network workplace community. We're going to be back next month with another super engaging topic. So watch this space, stay with us, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.